So thank you, Brandon, for joining us today on this podcast. And we are very, very excited to host you and to learn from you. And I think all our audience will also be very excited to hear from you. You're a man who needs no introduction at all. Um, I was just talking to Shivani earlier, and I told her that if anything that you put your hands into turns into gold. So just looking at the body of work that you have, a six-time CEO, an award-winning leader, a best-selling author, so many companies that you've helped build, so much employment that you've helped create, the impact of your work is amazing. And we just wanted to sort of leverage some of those insights that you've had firsthand, because we believe that a lot of this cannot be really taught. It has to be learned. It has to be observed. It has to be learned. It has to be imbibed, which is why this podcast session. So we want to start with this introduction. We want to sort of go into your journey till now. We know you started from coding. How did that go, and how did you end up in today's position? Let's start with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I started as a programmer in DBase4 and COBOL. So, back when COBOL was a significant language on mainframes. And what's interesting is, I actually worked at a company called EDS. We had 120,000 employees, 86 on the Fortune 100, so a pretty big company. And they had me coding for the U.S. Department of Defense. So I used to work at the Pentagon. And I was a young guy. I was 21, 22, and I'd bring my lunch every day, and just sit in the cafeteria, and I would meet with, and I'd usually sit with my clients, and all the time what I learned is at lunch they would generally complain about work they had to do, like, oh, we just got this new assignment, and I would naively go back to my area and say, hey, these guys have a deadline coming up. Do we have any more programmers? Do we have any business analysts? Do we have any tech designers? And what I didn't realize that I was doing is I was growing our account. And eventually they said, hey, Brennan, the client really likes you. We're going to put you over the account as an account manager. And I said, that's great. And then we grew the account more and more. And then they said, hey, we're putting you over in sales. We think you're better with people than technology. Now, at 23, 24, when somebody says that to you, you take that as a compliment, like, oh, I'm better with people. Now that I'm a little bit older, I'm like, did that mean I wasn't a good programmer? But that never crossed my mind at the time. So, I think I was a good programmer, not a great programmer. Mm-hmm. But I do think that what they were right is, I was good at problem solving. I was good at listening to clients. I was good at having empathy for the clients, and then ultimately coming up with ways to solve their problems. Right. And based on that, they said, hey, your technology background is probably better on the client side, driving growth, than it is, sitting there and programming as an individual. Right. But I did enjoy the programming.
Got it. Interesting. And I'm curious, a large part of your body of work is in the logistics and supply chain industry. How did you end up there? Was it from your first job? Was it organic, or was it more strategic? You planned for it. That's the problem that you like to solve. How did you end up going into that direction?
Yeah. So what I'd say, it was probably more organic in that I was at a company where we had 10,000 technicians around the globe that would go and fix things. They would servers, mainframes, large LCD, LED format TVs, and we had to. What's interesting is when I go back to when I was doing that, our number one challenge that we had was getting the right parts to the right technician at the right time, and then mapping their day out. Now, when I first started doing that, our drivers would actually print out MapQuest every day. Now, a lot of your members that are listening to this, or audience members, don't even know what MapQuest is. Right. But it was interesting. So I got a chance to see when we went from paper to building it into technology, to routing software, to logistics management, and then I was the largest client of a fleet management company. Mm-hmm. And I joined their board, and I actually joined their board as their technology advisor. So even though I was running companies now as a CEO, I was really still seen as kind of a technology leader. And in doing that, I kept pushing on the company, you can drive better service throughout your logistics network by automating things.
Right.
And I say things, and these were little things, from picking up vehicles to dropping off vehicles to managing parts and inventory and maintenance. And I wound up, after a few years, sitting on the board, actually joining that company, and it was Merchants Fleet, and being the CEO of that. And we eventually sold it in year 5 to Bain Capital and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. And what was great about that is, as we embrace technology faster than our competitors, we grew faster. So the market was growing about 5% annually. And over 4 years, we grew organically from 500 million in assets to 2.5 billion. And I credit almost all of that to innovative, out-of-the-box thinking, leveraging technology across the entire logistics and supply chain.
Interesting. That's amazing. I do want to come to the technology bit, but I remembered something that we spoke earlier in the earlier last week when we had a call, which was, you said, hey, the kind of entrepreneur you are not the entrepreneur who's sitting outside of somebody's garage and starting out.
Yep.
And you're the kind of entrepreneur who comes in late into the equation and helps you build the business reach its full potential, which you were not able to do after, say, 30 years of doing business together. Talk a little bit about that. That is super interesting to me as a concept.
Yeah, so every once in a while somebody will say, "Oh, Brendan, you're such a good entrepreneur," and I'll be like, "I'm actually not a true entrepreneur. I think if I started a business in my house, and I did once, and it was successful, but that's not what I'm good at. What I am better at is going into a steady state organization and making that organization entrepreneurial. So I went into Merchants, which was 56 years old. And in 56 years, it grew from 0 to 500 million. Right. So, 56 years to get to there. And 4 years later, on our 60-year anniversary, we were 2.5 billion. Wow. So I'm better at going into an existing company, and we started 8 businesses. So we started 8 new businesses when I was there, and over the course of 7 years. Most of them were started in years 1, 2, and 3, and 6 were successful. 2 were epic failures, but that's fine. If you get 6 right and you get 2 wrong, you're doing better than average. Right. So I'm better at going into like what I call a platform company and bringing an entrepreneurial culture, mindset, innovation mindset to it in the leadership that allows it to do things that maybe it hadn't done in Merchants' case, 56 years. And the company before that, very similar, was a 40-year-old company, and it was actually in decline. And, I spent the first year kind of stopping the decline, and then the second, third, and fourth year, growing it. We didn't grow that one as dramatically. We grew at 50%, but again, from a decline to 50% growth in 3 years. And that was by bringing, new ideas, new solutions to bear. So I'm entrepreneurial. I don't think I'm an entrepreneur.
Right. That's awesome. And, one of the things that, especially in the Silicon Valley, where a lot of my customers are today, I keep hearing this battle between, great execution and strategy. And I feel that there are so many people who disregard strategy fairly easily, saying, hey, there's no value for this. You just keep on executing and executing. But from your vantage point, it feels very strategic that you were able to do that, plan through all of this, because especially when you're going into an organization after, say, a 56-year mark, there are systems that are already set. So you need were you like a disruptive person where you said, hey, let's do everything from the ground up? Or did you take that and build a strategy around how to execute that into the newer phase that you were planning? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it starts with a strategy. And what I'll tell you is, I had a chance to be CEO of 6 different companies. 2 were turnarounds, 4 were transformations. I'll tell you, most companies don't have a well-documented strategy. They have one that's in their head, or it's evolving, or it's a couple pages, but they don't really have a well-documented strategy. So, and I think having a good strategy, but also making sure the strategy is executable and everybody in the organization knows their role in the strategy. So if you have a great strategy, but you're not able to execute it, or people don't know what their role is in the strategy, then it's not going to help. On the flip side, if you're a great execution company and you're killing it, but you don't have a good strategy, and so maybe you're pursuing markets that aren't the best markets, or you're pursuing markets that aren't or niches or in decline, then the company's going to follow that. So you really need both. And I think that's when you look at companies that achieve greatness, the definition that Jim Collins uses in Good to Great is greatness over a period of time. They balance strategy and execution. Right. And so, that's one thing I've always tried to be able to do is, balance those both. And that starts with, and I wrote about this in a book that I released last November called Dare to Disrupt, is having a system for disruption and transformation. So, I have this system. I've used it for companies. And each time, I honed my system. And each time, quite honestly, I made it a little bit better because I had the experience from the previous one. And I talk about 7 pillars in it. And the pillars are, first of all, you have to have the leadership that can transform. And one of the things that I espouse in leadership is you should have a 30-year leaders that come from the company that know the ins and outs in the institution. You should have a third that come from your competitors, and you should have a third that come from outside your industry. Right. And that's what I've done at each of my companies. And what I've found is your meetings are longer because you have more disruptive thinking. But what I find is you have one group that says, hey, here's how we do it. And you have another group that says, hey, I was at your biggest competitor and we used to beat you. And here's how we did it. And we did it a little bit better. Right. And then you have a third person in the room say, why do you guys do it that way at all? Like, I come from a totally different industry and we automated that a decade ago. And I find that if you can stack that together, you always wind up with a better client solution and a better solution internally for your employees. So that's like the first pillar is how do you build a leadership team that is going to allow your company to transform?
Interesting. Very, very interesting. You mentioned about one of your books, whereas I was going to bring up the FUD Factor, another book you wrote, which became an instant bestseller. And the interesting thing is, I think both of them solve for different problems. I thought that the FUD factor solved a lot for the human problem within large organizations.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about the FUD factor, because I think it's relevant for organizations that whether they're small, large, regardless of any industry, it's very, very relevant to what the leaders want to leaders face in today's world.
Yeah. So in that third book, there, the FUD factor FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And as humans, we have natural fear, uncertainty, and doubt for a lot of things. Right. And, like for instance, when I joined my last company and I said, let's start 2 new businesses this year. Initially people are like, what do you mean? Like, how are we going to do that? And you already had people that were doubting we could start 2 new businesses. Right. I actually had the board say, hey, Vernon, it's taken us 56 years to build the 3 businesses that we have. Why do you think you can? So there's that uncertainty. And then you had people that were fear like, well, what if they're successful? Like, we're not going to have enough people. And it's like, great, that's a first world problem. What if they're successful? So I think as humans, we tend to have that fear, uncertainty, and doubt that creeps in. And I think as a leader, one of your major jobs as a leader is create an environment that motivates as opposed to creates fear, where someone would say, Brendan, if we start these 2 new businesses, what if they fail? And I'm like, we failed trying. Correct. What if they fail? It's okay if they fail. Right. So all of a sudden you're saying someone's going, but they could fail. And I'm going, you're right, they could fail. But what I do know is if we don't start something new, there's no reason we're going to grow faster than 5%. Right. So you as a leader, your job is to take some of that fear, uncertainty, and doubt away. But coming to what you mentioned, that book, it really is targeted at the individual. Right. So like I look at high school juniors and seniors. Right now, they're like, take seniors. Right now, it's September 16th, and they're sitting there going, oh, I got to apply to 20 schools because I'm probably going to get rejected from 15 of them, and the school I want to go to isn't going to accept me. So they've got all this fear, uncertainty, and doubt going around their head. Yeah. And what I'd say is, you're right. Yeah, you're right. You're going to get rejected by a bunch. Yep, no problem. Let's focus on how you're going to get into 3 or 4 that you really, really, really like. And what are you going to do to make yourself stand out for that particular school or whatever? But our fears right now can become paralyzing. On the flip side, we can flip it around and have it be a motivator. So, whether it's a high school senior, like about applying to college, whether it's a college freshman that's like, oh my God, I'm on campus now. Like everyone, my roommate's smarter than me. Everyone's smarter than me. Like I'm lucky to get in here. How am I going to keep up? To, a first-time vice president who's like, oh, wow, I'm the youngest vice president at my company. Like everyone has more experience than me, and they're already starting to doubt their ability, yet somebody had faith in them and believed in them and put them in the role. So, what the book's premise is helping individuals overcome their own fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Right. And I want to leverage that with one point that I see fairly often right now. What happens when that fear, uncertainty, and doubt transcends beyond the individual to a business? Because, so for example, if you look at the tariff situation that is happening right now across the globe, right? There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about how business will survive, how business will run, how things are going to get moving. When there are factors, the tariffs are just an example, but when there are factors that you don't have control over, how do you deal with that and don't let the whole organization get demoralized because of that? Or how do you plan for business in a way where you don't really have to? So for example, in supply chain, there are so many moving pieces that if one thing gets affected, the whole supply chain is affected, right? So how do you plan for this in advance? How do you strategize, and how do you keep the team morale up in such times?
Yeah. So I'm going to use a COVID example because I think that might be really timely. So when COVID hit,
Yeah.
there were companies that did really well, and there were companies that stayed neutral, and there were companies that didn't do well.
Right.
And I'm not talking about like hand cleanser companies that like did well because that was because of that.
COVID,
I'm
yeah.
talking about like companies that figured things out. So the companies that said, okay, the world's changing. How are we going to help it change?
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to be an innovator in the change?
Mm-hmm.
Those companies did well. Companies that kind of said, okay, we're going to be impacted. How do we hunker down and protect ourselves? Generally stayed neutral or declined.
Right.
So I'm going to give you an example. So, COVID hits. We immediately have a whole bunch of our clients that say, hey, we had all these new trucks on order. We're not going to need them. We're not going to be able to use them. And we figured out how to take care of them. But we also sat around and said, okay, what industries are going to shrink? Hospitality is going to shrink, right? Limo services, cabs, Uber's going to shrink, okay? What's going to maintain? Okay, infrastructure is going to maintain. Energy companies are going to maintain. It's not going to matter. What companies are going to take off? Well, home delivery is going to take off. Last mile is going to take off. E-commerce is going to take off. Correct. So then we said, okay, let's go focus on last mile and home delivery and e-commerce. So let's go find all the vans in the country we can have for the Amazons, FedExes, UPSs, postal services. And we took people that were in other parts of the company and moved them over to our last mile team. And that grew tremendously during that time. And I remember, somebody at Amazon calling me up and saying, hey, we just have one question. We're super happy with you. Don't be nervous. But how do you have vans when nobody else, no other supplier has them? Right. And I said, okay, well, you're renting them from us, right? And he goes, yeah, no. But you keep saying yes. Everybody else says no. I said, well, our industry does something where we all order new vans. We buy new vans and then we rent them. Right. There's no new vans in the world. There's not one new van in the world we can buy. We're out buying every used van in the United States. But that had never been done. No fleet management companies ever were out buying used vans. That wasn't the business model. Right. But if we sat there and said, we want to help our clients need vans. There are no vans. And I remember in a room going, of course there is. And well, where are they? And people would be like, they're used. I go, right now, Amazon doesn't care if they're white, blue, tan, red. They don't care if they're new or old. We were all sitting at home ordering so much more They just
Correct.
needed vans and pickups and various trucks, box trucks. So our instead of looking at fearful, because we had industries like we had a summer camp business, we did zero revenue. That had been one of the company's major engines before. Our Uber business, zero. Like just
Right.
but so you've got to if you sit back and say, okay, this is getting done to me, you're going to lose. If you play
Right.
offense and you say, how can we go help people? How can we go solve problems? You're going to do well. And there's a lot of companies that did exceedingly well during
Right.
COVID. Now, if you were in certain industries, it didn't matter how creative you were or how innovative, you weren't going to do well. But like even if you take an industry like hospitality, which really took a hit, but the ones that did well completely reinvented how they did takeout.
Right.
And I know a few restaurants that actually now have more takeout than they do in dining. And COVID changed how they totally approach the market. And a few I know have actually shrunk their dining room size and have a bigger takeout. So I think it comes back to, are you embracing the possibilities and opportunities, or are you scared of the consequences?
Right. Interesting. I want to touch base on one of the things that you are widely known for, and you have been in throughout your career, I think, which is you just mentioned something which is interesting, which is how can you go out and help people? And typically, when you do that at a very large scale, you need technology as the aid to be able to do that. And you have proactively been talking about technology for a very long time. Can you tell us how technology comes into the picture and where it can really, how should supply chain leaders think about technology? Because I know a lot of them are still operating as though technology is something to be afraid of, or it keeps changing quite often. So how would you advise, or what is your message to people? How should they look at technology?
Yeah, so I know one of the things I talk about is evolve or die, and I
Right.
intentionally use the word die to be dramatic.
Right.
And as opposed to evolve or stay stagnant, like that's not as interesting to listen to. So I say
Right.
evolve or die. And if you're evolving in 2025, technology it just has to play a very big part. And I can remember in 2020 talking about machine learning,
Yeah.
and I don't think in 2020 I was actually using the word AI. I was using much more machine learning, where I'm
Right.
like, hey, guys, like, why can't we do predictive analytics? Why can't we do machine learning? Why, like I'll give you the smallest example. When somebody would turn a van in, a human being would walk around the van with a little notebook and write down all the damage, and then they'd give an assessment. And you'd get that in a few weeks. And by the way, like I remember sitting there saying, like, that's really cumbersome. I said, why can't at the time machine learning and predictive analytics? Why can't the renter do a video of the van themselves?
Right.
And why can't we feed that into a database that says, okay, the bumper has a 2-inch nick on it, that's $800. The
Right.
rim got dinged, that's $400.
Right.
And we did that, and what we found is our clients liked it much better because they participated in it. When someone walks around the car, they always felt like, oh, well, they're gonna like charge me too much. All of a
Right.
sudden they felt like, no, I'm walking around the car and I'm going to get a real estimate. And so I used, but that was 2021 when we did that. And I don't think it was until 22, maybe late 21, 22, when we started using AI as a term more.
The
By the way,
word, yeah.
artificial intelligence has been around forever. I can remember in college doing artificial intelligence programming and neural languages. So it's been around, but not in our daily monikers. But I remember some people sitting there saying, oh, are we going to trust that software to do that over people? And I
Right.
was sitting there going, absolutely. Like I think it's very tough for like 1,000 different people walking around 1,000 different vans to get it right. I think that's very tough. I think putting it in where, a machine's going, it's 4 inches, it's 8 inches, it's 12 inches, it's whatever. So, I think that if you embrace it, you have a bright future. If you don't, I don't think you have a bright future. And I know what we did is we did a lot of retraining.
Mm.
And what people saw was they went from being afraid, am I going to lose my job, to technology, to my job is going to be more enriched through technology. Like we had
Right.
people do basic data entry, right? I don't think anybody actually comes into the office going, I love data entry. Like they just
True that.
don't.
Yeah.
But when we're able to automate things through batch processing, which has been around for 50 years, 100 years, but be able to bring technology to it, and they go, something that used to take me 4 hours now takes me 5 minutes, and now I can have a greater impact on the business. But here's the catch, we can actually pay you more money now.
Right.
Because when you were doing data entry for those 8 hours, that's worth, pick a number, $15 an hour. If you're
Correct.
doing that data entry in 30 minutes through batch processing, and the other 7.5 hours, you're doing higher level skill things, we can now pay you $20 an hour, $25 an hour, $30 an hour. So I think once people realized technology is an enabler, it's not trying to take my job from me. And if I can have a greater impact on the company, I can make more money. I think people really came along well. But that's the job of leadership, is to create that narrative.
Right.
And this kind of goes back to that fear. If a leader's saying, "Hey, we're going to bring in technology and it's going to take jobs away," it's a fear monger. Like, we aren't going to need all of you. I was in a meeting recently and somebody said, "Hey, AI is going to replace all of our first year analysts in the future," and I'm like, why would you say that? Why
Correct.
would you say that? Because it's not true. How about it's going to make our first year analyst appear to be third year analysts by the end of their first year?
Right.
Because you're never not going to need those people, but maybe you need less of them, or maybe you can do more deals because you're able to analyze more. Who knows? But I think leaders can have a tremendous impact on their organizations at how technology is perceived. And and maybe it's because I started my career in technology, I've always viewed it as a great enabler,
Right.
and not something that's going to take things away from us.
Right. Very interesting. Actually, that touches upon an interesting point, which is um, when you typically have a lot of stakeholders as say, a CTO of a company, right? In supply chain, you typically have a lot of stakeholders because there's just so many people handling so many different things. Um, what do you think are typical inhibitions that you can think of? I'm asking you this question because you've been a CEO of many supply chain companies and you understand the tech. So what are things that people typically hesitate to do with technology, where they should go out and disrupt using technology, but they're just hesitant because they don't know how technology will evolve over a certain amount of time? So what are those inhibitions that you think, or
Yeah,
problems they are
I
facing?
guess
Yeah.
I guess what I would start with is, I think the biggest mistake I see CTOs make
Yeah.
is they don't break things down into pilots and small projects.
Right.
They come in saying, we want to revolutionize how we do customer service and we're going to implement X, Y, Z, and it's $10 million.
Mm.
And I think that automatically puts your CFO or your head of operations like on the defensive, as opposed to, hey, we want to go run a pilot with our European customer service team and see if we can achieve higher level satisfaction scores.
Interesting.
And so I think a lot of times, and it usually happens around this time when you're starting to look at 26 budgets,
Hmm.
you throw these projects at it. And I think it's human nature to look at a new project with all the inherent risks.
Right.
Now, hopefully you have an organization that looks at the risks and opportunities, but a lot of people look at the risks. And certainly your CFO is going to look at the risks, and your head of operations are going to look at the risks. Your head of
Right.
sales is going to tell you, that's great, we're going to be able to provide better service, I'm all for that. But I often say, why don't you chunk that down and go run a pilot? Go give me
Right.
some metrics. And then let's inform into it, as opposed to, now when I look at the CTOs that are more successful,
Hmm.
they're very good at running proof of concepts. They embrace AI early when they didn't know what it was, and they started with little things, and they go, wow, we used AI to make our employees more productive here. We used an AI bot in our customer service. We're now using an AI bot in our finance area to find discrepancies in expense reports. And next
Right.
thing you know, the company's starting to say, oh, this AI thing is working well, as opposed to somebody who comes in and says, hey, we're going to put AI across the organization. I'm going to hire a vice president of artificial intelligence. And all of a sudden people are like going, whoa, what's that? So I think people that understand technology impacts your culture and how do you bring the culture along, do much better. And I think those CTOs are rarer and fewer that understand and take into account, the old term, change management. And
Right.
and I don't like using change management as much because I think when you have to talk about change management, it usually means you're running a big project
Right.
as opposed to you ran a
Small
pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, if you run the pilot and it makes people's lives better and your customers' lives better, you've got your advocates in the organization that are going to push for it. So the CTOs that I've seen do better are ones that are more culturally aligned with the organization, and just understand how to start small and build.
Right. Could we take an example, a live example of what might be the use case of AI right now? The last time we spoke, you said, hey, organizations have started using ChatGPT, but they've not really integrated AI into the process. Can we look at an example from any logistics use case that you can think of where AI would make a big dent, but people are not really doing that yet, or they're still getting to it?
Yeah. So, the example that I use, and I'll build off of it, where we built AI into this phone app. So you would rent the vehicle from us. You would then get the phone app. You'd walk around the car. You'd
Right.
do that. We then built out that entire app from the front end of you could reserve, you could rent. It would give you directions. You could actually, if you had an issue with it, say, where should I get this maintained?
Right.
And what we would do is we wouldn't direct you to the closest place. We would actually use AI to direct you to the closest, least expensive place. So if
Right.
all of a sudden you're driving the van down the road and you go, oh, I need an oil change, and you go to pull into Jiffy Lube, if
Right.
you use the app, it would say, okay, we know where you are. And the AI would say, don't go to that Jiffy Lube, go to Valvoline a mile away. We have a contract with them and it's $5 cheaper.
Right.
Then when you brought your car in for a maintenance checkup, check engine light comes on. And
Right.
you go in, and by the way, the mechanic comes back and says you need these 7 things.
Yeah.
We would run that through the app. That would have an ASE certified technician review it, and we would find about 12 to 18% of the work that was getting told that you were getting told needed to be done did not need to be done.
Right.
So if you were getting told, hey, your van's going to require $1,000 worth of work, we were saying on average it was $820 to $880.
Right.
And that wasn't getting done by human beings. That was getting done by taking the 200,000 vehicles that we had. We poured that into a database, and it would say, the mechanic is telling you need a transmission flush. I'm trying to make this super tangible. And
Yeah.
AI would say a transmission flush is only needed every 30,000 miles. Your vehicle has 15,000 miles on it. Don't do the transmission flush. And that wasn't getting done by a person. Because, by the way, you're driving this van today. You might be driving a different van tomorrow. And so when you got told this is what the car needed, you were like, sure, I don't know. And I would even argue if it was your vehicle, you still might not know. But that's where we built in. So the use case was if you allow your drivers to use our software and our technology and our apps, you will save 15% on average just on maintenance, just for stuff that you don't need to be doing. You will then save 5% by going to the right places where there's preferred pricing or a relationship that gives incentives back.
Right.
But all that wasn't done by you calling into a help desk and me saying, okay, where are you? Okay, you're just outside Tulsa, here's where you are, and directing you to it. Because, by the way, you probably wouldn't call in. You'd probably just go, screw it, I'm just going to go over to this Jiffy Lube.
Right.
We put the power, we enabled the driver themselves to be able to make the best possible decisions, and in the end, save nearly 20% of the cost of vehicles.
Right.
And that's you think to an Amazon or to a Terminex, the big bug company, like when you have 10,000 vans running around, 10,000 pickups running around, and you're saving 20%, that's a really big number.
Interesting. One of the interesting things that I've observed you do, which I think very a lot of leaders lack, is you're very specific with your examples and you're giving really, actual business use cases. So, for example, one of the earlier examples that you gave was around, how CTOs should start. Typically, they come up with like a $10 million project, and instead they should go with a smaller pilot. Even when you were explaining that pilot, you gave a very specific example of customer support, and that will so there was an objective, there's a specific team or a specific customer who will get impacted, and there's a metric that you're going for at the end. Even right now, you're talking about metrics very openly. And thank you for that, by the way, because that really helps us visualize how business impact is created through technology and your strategic decisions. So the question is, what are the key metrics that you would recommend a logistics leader to look at? It can be again an example, say from shipping, because you used a couple of examples from a last mile delivery. But I know you have a shipping. You're a
Yeah. So the one that I honed in on, and keep in mind this is my experience, so my experience is different than many of your audience
yeah,
experience. It's cost per mile,
right,
and the reason I say cost per mile, you can neutralize that. You
right,
know, it could be an airplane, it could be a train, it could be a box truck, it could be a van. I happen to be in New York City. It could be a guy on a bike,
right,
like doing a DoorDash, or an Amazon has the little e-bikes running around the city.
yeah,
So I think it's cost per mile
okay,
because you want to drive everything to the most efficient cost per mile.
right,
And I can tell you some of our bigger clients, we would actually specifically tell them, I'm going to give you a great example.
yeah,
We would say, you order all-wheel drive vehicles. And you're like,
right,
absolutely, we want them. I go, but 72% of your vehicles are not in all-wheel drive territories. But you want all-wheel drive vehicles because like it's better. But like if you have a pickup truck in Florida, you don't need all-wheel drive. Now, if you have it in New Hampshire, you need that all-wheel drive.
right,
And I say this as an example of, well, if that's $3,000 less, and oh, by the way, the two-wheel drive gets better mileage, it's less to maintain, you're now bringing down your cost per mile. And so we would always look at how do you most efficiently get the cost per mile. And I'll use another example. Everyone would say, oh, we need vans. And a lot of times we would say, like, well, what are you shipping? And they would walk us through and would say, you don't need vans. You don't need vans. You have small products. What you need is, I'm blanking on like the Ford Transit, the small Ford Transit,
yeah,
the Ram Cargo. Like you need smaller ones, or oftentimes you need pickups, or sometimes you need crossover SUVs. Because we would sit there and say, you're not carrying anything over 400 pounds, 500 pounds. You're carrying packages. Let's put down the second seat and let's do. But there was this mindset of, but we're a courier company. And we're like, yes, you are. But
right,
you're currying small things. And so we always looked for cost per mile. And that's why you see companies like Amazon really get on board, with like, again, I happen to be in New York City and all over the city. And I take my dogs out at 5:30 in the morning. I take them on a walk, and all over the city, you see e-bikes, Amazon e-bikes, where it's a
right,
bike with a big box on the back. And
right,
they've said, hey, to get to various buildings, that's way cheaper than a van, but also it's way more efficient because that person can go through traffic. If it's a van, it's going to be very tough throughout the day. So I think Amazon's a leader at the cost per mile. And thankfully they are. That's because when we hit Prime, we all want it the next day.
right.
I always use cost per mile. And
Okay.
again, I think that was the great neutralizer. Like for instance, we had clients in Alaska and we knew cost per mile was going to be much higher.
Right.
We just knew that, like, for everything from shipping to getting it to the acquisition price was going to be higher, but
Right.
we could still see once we're in Alaska, how are we going to drive that cost per mile down?
Right. Right. One of the interesting things that I ended up talking to one of our clients earlier was they mentioned the same thing that cost per mile becomes they're a trucking company and they mentioned that hey, cost per mile is an important thing for us. and they were talking about how they went from a very high cost per mile as they started, and eventually over 3 or 4 years reduced that substantially to market standards.
Yep.
The interesting piece was that um, they said that it was very difficult to decipher cost per mile because of the constant moving, fluctuating things. Do you think it's a difficult metric to obtain as a
No, I think that's an excuse. Sorry. I think if you have a good finance team and you have a good modeling team, you can do it.
Got it.
And when you do it, like, be okay with being 98% right.
Right.
If you're 2 or 3% off and you got to throw some assumptions, and keep in mind, the good thing about AI is as you get more data, maybe you start off at 90% accurate.
Correct.
But a year later you'll be 96%, and 2 years later you'll be 98%. But that goes to what I'd say is, if someone's like, "Oh, that's really tough to track," I would say that's their FUD kicking in.
Right.
It's like, just go do it. And oh, by the way, let's say like someone says, "Oh, that's wrong." Maybe it is. Maybe it is, but fix it. But like, if I would say, if you're a logistics company and you can't track cost per mile, you shouldn't be a logistics company.
Correct.
How about that?
I agree with that. Yeah, and I think with AI coming in and so many things happening, I think it's going to be fairly easy. You're going to find a tool that allows you, that just gathers everything from your data, and if it is modeled right, it will give you fair accuracy over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm going to move on to two ending sort of pieces of the session. One is sort of an extension to the metrics thing, which is typically leaders, say 10 years ago, probably leaders did this on an Excel sheet. But if you were to design a custom dashboard for yourself to view the visibility and the health of your logistics company, whatever company that could be, what are things that you would put on the dashboard? What are things that you would wake up every day and be like, hey, these are the 6 things that I need to know the health and the visibility of my company?
Yep. The first, none of them would be financial.
Okay.
Because all financial metrics are lagging indicators.
Right.
Like, did you make money? So everything I would have be leading indicators. Right. Now, depending on what you do as a logistics company, leading indicators, I'll give some different examples that I've had as leading indicators. I had how many service calls did we do per day per technician? Right. So when you have 10,000 technicians, and here's what I could tell you. Yeah. And I had a executive dashboard, so it would say 4.5, and I'd say, okay, at 4.5 per day, we didn't make $1. Right. At 4.51, we made money. By the way, I could then drill down and say at 4.5, and I could go New York City, 6 calls per day. Okay, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 2 calls per day. Right. So, but that's a leading indicator. Like, if I said to my CFO, did we make money yesterday? Their answer would be like, I can't tell you on a daily basis if we made. It's impossible. But I knew from modeling, 4.5 calls per technician per day was break even. 4.4 was a bad day. 4.5 was not a good day. 4.6 was a good day. And then, by the way, as everybody knew that and watched it, we eventually got that number, by the way, to 5.6. But we also incented people that. But right next to it, we had our surveys that we got in daily. So we didn't want it to go 5.6 calls per day and surveys from 85% to 70%, because people were doing the service call, throwing the package like at the door and running. Because yes, you did more, but you're not going to have client retention. So everyone that I would have would be a leading indicator. Client satisfaction, service calls per day. Depending on your logistics company, it could be miles transported, packages transported, miles served, clients served. But, and by the way, if you have those leading indicators and you don't know what they mean, what I'd say is you don't understand your business. Right. And that's where, if you knew, okay, I'll use the example, 4.5 calls was break even, and industry average was 82% customer service. 80% we were behind the industry. 84 we were ahead. And by the way, then when you could drill in and say, hey, we've been hovering at 84, what's going on? You could go in and you could say, give me every city below 80, and it would give you 12 cities.
Right.
You could then say, at 7 in the morning to those 12 city managers, hey guys, what is it going to take for us to get above 80?
Right.
By the way, different people would say different things. Some people would say, hey, I work in an environment where it's really difficult. We have this particular client. They're never going to give us 80. Somebody else says, we just don't have enough people. Great, let's get them more people.
Right.
So you have to know your business by leading indicators. So, I would joke with my CFO, he'd come in and it'd say, and the joke would be, it'd say, guesses on revenue and profit this month. And he used to jokingly say, oh, you're so good at math. I'm like, no, I'm good at leading indicators. I could nail our revenue and our profit off of the leading indicators because they were telling me on a daily basis how we were doing.
Right.
And then, by the way, if you use the dashboard, you can then click on daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, month to date, and you can see how you're doing. When you're doing that, that allows you to make adjustments on September 15th, September 16th, September 17th. You're not waiting till October 9th to say, oh, what changes should I have made in September now that I get the financials? But people think the financials are the holy grail, and I would tell you the exact opposite. Financials are not.
Interesting. So you were talking a lot about the data that is being modeled to make decisions of the future. Do you think with AI forecasting and prediction and that sort of a layer will help you look at the future as well, or would you?
Oh, absolutely. What I love about AI is, let's say you're at 4.6 calls per technician and you're at $1.17 per mile, whatever it is. AI can actually help you generate. How can we make that better? And you can run scenarios through AI.
Right.
What if I increase my labor force so we could have higher client satisfaction? And it will actually help you model, and you can throw scenarios at it. By the way, when you do that, then you start to run it and you run it and you run it and you run it and you run it. Then you actually say, okay, now let's go do a pilot based on that. Versus like that iterative nature that AI allows us to do, allows us to iterate and do pilots faster than ever before.
Got it. Awesome. So you're starting with financial data, with leading indicators, and then you have customer success metrics, and then you have, you mentioned metrics specific to your logistics field. So per mile cost or whatever, those are the three things that you would want in your dashboard. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. The final piece, we're moving into this very exciting final piece, which is a rapid fire round, where I will ask you some questions which are fairly simple, and you can answer in one sentence or one word, one phrase, and then sort of give a justification to why you think that way. It could be at the end, or it could be at the end of the question, according to you. Okay. When you're starting out, would you build in-house tech capabilities, or would you get capabilities with a partner?
Both.
Okay. One innovation you wish logistics companies adopted faster?
AI to make a business impact, not a productivity impact.
Okay. If you have a magic wand, what one tech or data problem would you want to be fixed tomorrow across all the companies that you have?
Data integrity, single source of data. I think that's a challenge companies have, is they have 3-4 data streams that conflict.
Got it. I had one, but you sort of already answered that, which is the one KPI that you obsess over. Now we know your secret KPI that you sort of obsess over. Okay, let's look at what else we can have. Actually, a lot of these that I have, we sort of covered in the conversation. So
that's fine.
That this was just amazing as a session in general.
Good. I'm glad.
Awesome. Great.